She stood rigid as the farmer drove the trembling mare off his land, convinced her unborn foal was worthless. By dawn the next day, a fragile cry from the deserted pasture shattered every certainty they held. There was an unspoken tension in the air as the sun rose over a small patch of farmland nestled at the edge of a weather-worn town. Martin, a farmer known for his strict ways and pragmatic views, stood outside a simple wooden barn with a hardened expression. He had lived on this land his entire life, inheriting both the soil and the stoic temperament from generations before him. Inside the barn, a pregnant mare named Lily shifted restlessly. She was a gentle creature, her coat a rich mahogany that glowed softly in the dawn light. Yet Martin only saw her as a liability. The hay was running low, and the cost of her care had become a burden. He grumbled that morning, determined to do something drastic. The townspeople had heard rumors that Lily's pregnancy was fraught with complications. Some whispered that the foal was likely weak or deformed, a product of questionable breeding. Others speculated that Martin's cold-hearted approach stemmed from losing valuable livestock in the past. Few dared to confront him about the mare. Though life was already hard enough, fields often yielded meager crops, and the nearest veterinary clinic sat miles away, making care for large animals a luxury. Lily's belly had grown considerably, her steps slower by the day. The old veterinarian who had visited once suggested extra care and gentle monitoring, but Martin had paid little heed. To him, Lily was just another line on the expense sheet, a gamble without a guaranteed payoff. With a huff, Martin flung open the barn door and trudged inside. Lily turned her head in his direction, her big brown eyes filled with quiet hope. She had been restless all night, occasionally letting out soft whinnies that echoed through the rafters. Martin, however, interpreted her distress as drama, an inconvenience that ate away at his patience. In a brusque motion, he unlatched her stall and tugged on her halter. Lily let out a low, trembling neigh, struggling to balance her heavy belly. Martin muttered under his breath, complaining about the financial toll. He'd intended to sell Lily months ago, but the word of her precarious pregnancy had spread, scaring off potential buyers. Now he felt stuck with a mare who, in his eyes, gave nothing in return. The old wooden boards creaked as Martin led Lily outside. The farmland spanned acres of dry, stubbly grass, the result of a poor harvest season. A windmill stood guard in the distance, its rusted blades turning lazily. Chickens pecked at the dirt near the barn, scattered by Lily's cautious steps. Martin's wife, Helen, watched from the kitchen window, her brows creased with concern. She had often pleaded with Martin to show a little compassion toward Lily, especially in her delicate state, but Martin's mind was set. He believed the cost of a veterinarian, the extra feed, and the stall space was an unwelcome burden. "I can't keep throwing money at a lost cause," he told Helen the previous evening, his tone final and unyielding. That morning, Martin had decided to drive Lily out to the far edge of his property, a corner seldom visited and lacking in shelter. His plan was to simply leave her there, hoping that nature would run its course. If the mare delivered a healthy foal, maybe it would survive on its own. If not, it would be one less problem to worry about. So, with the rising sun casting elongated shadows, Martin led Lily down the dirt path. Each of her steps seemed heavier than the last, and once she stumbled slightly in a pothole. Martin gave the rope a harsh tug, impatience flaring. The mare's ears drooped, but she continued forward. It was as if she sensed the inevitability of her fate. By the time they reached the far pasture, Lily was breathing heavily, her nostrils flaring. The heat of the day had begun to settle in, and Martin was drenched in perspiration. With a grunt of irritation, he unlatched Lily's halter and turned her loose. "Enough's enough," he muttered. "She can fend for herself." Lily stood still for a moment, blinking under the harsh sunlight. Her swollen belly swayed slightly as she tried to maintain her balance. Though she had known Martin's rough ways, she seemed perplexed by this sudden isolation. For a few beats, their gazes met, man and mare locked in an unspoken tension. Martin, however, refused to soften. He tossed the halter into the back of his pickup truck and headed back to the main farmstead, leaving Lily alone with the biting wind rustling through the dried grass. Helen emerged from the house just as Martin returned. She took one look at his grim face and understood what had happened. "You can't just abandon her out there," she said, her voice trembling. Martin sighed, taking off his hat to wipe the sweat from his brow. "What else can I do?" he snapped. "We can't afford to keep her in that barn a day longer. She's probably just going to lose the foal anyway, if she even manages to deliver it at all." A flicker of sorrow crossed Helen's features. She had grown fond of the gentle mare, often feeding Lily apples and brushing her mane. Yet Martin's temper was as unyielding as the parched soil. Without another word, Helen turned away, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Afternoon turned to dusk, painting the sky in streaks of pink and orange. A quiet settled over the farm, broken only by the distant clucking of chickens and the lowing of cattle. In the far pasture, Lily remained standing alone. Hunger gnawed at her, but the sparse grass provided little nourishment. Occasionally, she would lower herself to rest, only to struggle back to her feet with labored effort. Overhead, a hawk circled, its sharp cry echoing across the fields. The mare's ears perked, attuned to every rustle in the grass and every flicker of movement. Night descended in a sweeping veil, stars dotted the sky, and the moonlight illuminated Lily's solitary figure. She seemed to sense that something was coming, her body tensing with anticipation. By midnight, clouds had rolled in, shrouding the moon and bringing a chill wind across the plains. Lily began to pace in tight circles, her breath coming in short bursts. The labor pains had started. Her flanks quivered, and her eyes widened with a mixture of fear and instinctual determination. No one was there to soothe her, to stroke her muzzle or offer soft words of encouragement. The barn light was a distant glow on the horizon, and she stood in darkness, guided only by nature's unwavering command. The contractions came stronger, sharper. Lily let out a strained whinny, her legs trembling under the weight of imminent motherhood. She fought through each wave of pain, hooves stamping the ground. Dawn remained hours away, and no help was in sight. In the main house, Helen tossed and turned in restless sleep, plagued by nightmares of Lily alone in the field. Martin snored beside her, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the turmoil he had set in motion. Outside, under the cover of night, destiny was unfolding. Lily's final labor pangs arrived with unrelenting force. Her body slick with sweat, she sank to the ground, expelling a breathless moan that pierced the silence. It was a solitary battle for both her life and that of the foal. When the moment at last came, it arrived in a rush of primal energy. Lily's muscles clenched, and in one final, shuddering push, the foal emerged onto the damp earth. The mare collapsed, her chest heaving, while the newborn lay still for a heartbeat. Then, as if touched by a miracle, the tiny creature wriggled, letting out a soft, trembling whimper that cut through the darkness. At that instant, a faint glow touched the horizon. No one could have predicted what was about to happen next, but the coming sunrise would change everything for Lily, her new foal, and every skeptic on the farm. By the time the first pale beams of morning light flickered across the horizon, Lily had struggled through the night to deliver her foal. The young creature, still slick with afterbirth, lay curled in the damp grass while Lily managed to steady her trembling legs. She had no strength left to do more than gently nuzzle the newborn, urging it to breathe. With each labored exhalation, Lily's breath billowed in faint clouds against the cold pre-dawn air. She flicked her ears, scanning the empty fields for any sign of help. Deep down, she sensed that her foal needed more than her warmth alone. Meanwhile, at the farmhouse, Helen awoke to a subtle feeling of unease. She slipped out of bed and peered through the window. The far pasture, a wide expanse of dull brown, revealed nothing unusual at first glance. Yet a pang of guilt lanced through her as she remembered how Lily had been left to fend for herself. In the dim light, Helen's heart quickened. She turned to wake Martin, but he merely rolled over in groggy annoyance. Deciding she could wait no longer, Helen hastily dressed, grabbed a worn jacket, and stepped outside. The air smelled of dew and distant hay, and the sky retained the faintest blush of sunrise. Helen's boots crunched on the gravel path that led to the truck. She hesitated, glancing at the barn where Lily used to sleep. The emptiness there tugged at her conscience. Determined, she climbed into the pickup, turned the key, and rattled down the rutted lane toward the secluded pasture. Every bump in the road made her heart pound faster. Guilt and worry melded into a single knot in her stomach. Why hadn't she insisted on giving Lily a proper chance? She knew Martin's reasons. Money was tight, the harvest was uncertain, and the mare's pregnancy had been fraught with risk. But some inner voice kept telling her that they had made a terrible mistake. A weak sunbeam broke through the clouds just as Helen reached the fence line. She cut the engine and stepped out, scanning the field. At first, she saw nothing but swaying grass and shadows. Then she spotted Lily, lying on her side near a small rise in the terrain. Helen pressed a hand to her mouth. The mare's ribs rose and fell in shallow breaths, and beside her lay a tiny bundle of legs and fur. The foal was trying desperately to stand, its spindly limbs slipping on the wet ground. An instant wave of relief washed over Helen, mingled with alarm. Lily might be alive, but they were far from safe. As Helen approached, she noted the mare's exhaustion. Lily's coat glistened with sweat, her nostrils flaring with each breath. The foal bleated a feeble sound that cracked Helen's heart. While she lacked formal veterinary training, she knew enough to see that both mother and child were in a precarious state. She dropped to her knees, ignoring the cold dampness soaking through her jeans, and stroked Lily's muzzle. The mare's eyes fluttered open, a flicker of recognition softening the fear that lingered there. Gently, Helen reached for the foal. It trembled against her hands, so small and vulnerable that she felt tears press at the corners of her eyes. "You're okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to reassure, Lily, the foal, or herself. The mother horse let out a tired nicker, as if to welcome Helen's help. Overhead, the sky brightened, lending color to the battered farmland. Helen surveyed the distance. There was no sign of Martin. She felt a twinge of anger at his callousness, but she told herself there was no time to dwell on that now. First, she needed to help the mare regain her strength, then figure out if the foal was healthy enough to stand. With trembling hands, Helen pulled out her phone. The reception was spotty, but she managed to dial the local veterinarian. "Dr. Reeves, please, it's urgent," she told the receptionist. After a tense moment, the vet's voice came on the line, calm and seasoned. She explained the situation, describing Lily's condition, the foal's fragile state, and their location. The vet promised to come as soon as possible, though her voice carried a note of caution. It could take more than an hour to arrive. Helen swallowed her panic, determined to keep mother and baby comfortable until help came. She stroked Lily's neck to steady the mare. Lily's eyes followed Helen's every movement, as if trying to understand. The foal wobbled again, attempting to stand, and after a few shaky efforts, it managed to get all four hooves under its tiny body. The moment it stood upright, Helen felt a swell of hope. The little creature was no bigger than a large dog, but its spirit shone through. Lily let out a low, gentle nicker, encouraging her newborn to move closer. Helen scanned the surroundings. The pasture offered no shelter from the rising wind. She hurried to the truck, retrieved a spare blanket, and fashioned a makeshift windbreak by tying the fabric to the fence. It wasn't much, but at least it would offer a buffer against the chill. By the time she returned, Lily had managed to roll onto her chest. The mare's ears swiveled forward, and Helen noticed a spark of maternal instinct replacing the earlier defeat. Despite her exhaustion, Lily nudged the foal, urging it to nurse. Moments later, the high-pitched sound of an engine rumbled from across the field. Martin's truck barreled over the uneven ground, stirring dust in its wake. He stepped out, his mouth set in a thin line. "Helen, what in blazes are you doing?" he demanded, striding over. "You know we can't afford a vet bill right now." Helen stiffened, refusing to back down. "She was dying out here, Martin. So was her baby. You really expected them to just... what? Magically fend for themselves?" Her tone was sharper than she had ever used with him before. Martin's gaze flicked to the foal, which wobbled uncertainly beside Lily. He looked momentarily taken aback by the sight, though he quickly masked it with a scowl. "I told you. We can't keep this up," he muttered. "They're more trouble than they're worth." His eyes shifted, betraying a flicker of doubt. Helen took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "We'll see what Doc Reeves says. If there's a fighting chance, we have to give it to them." Before Martin could reply, a dust cloud announced the arrival of the veterinarian's old station wagon. Dr. Reeves stepped out, a woman in her late 50s with hair tied in a practical braid. She wasted no time, grabbing her bag and hurrying toward Lily. "Morning, folks," she said briskly, kneeling to examine the mare. Her practiced hands moved quickly over Lily's belly and limbs. She murmured quiet reassurances to the horse, checking her breathing and temperature. The foal eyed Dr. Reeves with wide, uncertain eyes, stepping closer to Lily's protective body. Helen hovered nervously. Martin stood a few paces away, arms crossed, as though determined not to appear soft. After a thorough examination, Dr. Reeves rose, dusting off her jeans. "She's weak," the veterinarian said, "but with proper care, I think she can pull through. I don't see signs of internal tearing or anything that requires an immediate surgical intervention. The foal seems small, but it's alive and alert." A faint smile curved her lips. "You've got a miracle on your hands." Helen's tension eased, replaced by cautious optimism. "So what do we do?" she asked. Dr. Reeves glanced from Helen to Martin, her demeanor firm. "We bring them back to the barn. Give Lily warm bedding, enough food and water, and keep a close watch. The foal needs colostrum soon. I'll administer some supplements to help, but the mare's milk is essential for building its immunity." Martin's face hardened. "And the cost," he said bluntly. "We're barely scraping by." A hint of exasperation flickered in Dr. Reeves' eyes, but she answered calmly. "We can set up a payment plan, Martin. I've known you two for years. I'm not going to let the horse suffer over a few bills, but let's be clear, if you want them to survive, you have to commit. That means feed, occasional checkups, maybe some medication if complications arise." She folded her arms. "It's your call." Helen held her breath, silently pleading. She knew Martin's pride sometimes dictated his decisions more than common sense. For a moment, he stayed silent, staring at the newborn foal that had somehow managed to remain standing despite the biting wind. Then, with a barely audible sigh, he gave a terse nod. "Fine," he said at last. "We'll do what we can, but don't expect miracles." Dr. Reeves allowed a relieved smile. "Let's get them loaded, then, gently." Helen hurried to gather some rope and construct a makeshift sling to help Lily. Meanwhile, Martin went back to his truck, rummaging for a tarp and some old blankets. Despite his outward grumbling, he seemed unable to tear his gaze from the foal. Something about the tiny creature, with its delicate features and stubborn determination to stand, stirred a mix of wonder and regret in him. He remembered all the foals he'd seen over the years, some healthy, others not. This one was different, surviving against all odds, born in the harshest conditions. Together, they managed to coax Lily to her feet. She swayed dangerously, but Helen and Dr. Reeves steadied her on either side. The foal followed, bleating in protest as the humans fussed. Slowly, carefully, they led Lily and her baby toward Dr. Reeves's station wagon, where Martin's truck waited with a small trailer attached. The progress was agonizingly slow. Every step an effort for Lily, every tug on the rope a potential hazard. When they finally reached the trailer, Martin laid down the tarp and blankets. With a few nudges and Dr. Reeves's guidance, Lily stepped inside, the foal trotting uncertainly behind her. Helen secured the latch, exhaling in relief. Dr. Reeves wiped her brow and turned to address the couple. "Take them straight to the barn. I'll drive behind you and help settle them in." She paused, meeting Martin's gaze. "This is only the beginning. She's not out of danger. Neither is the foal. But I believe they've got a fighting chance." Martin nodded, unable or unwilling to meet Helen's eyes. Without further words, he got into the driver's seat and started the engine, guiding the trailer back across the pasture. Helen climbed into the passenger seat, stealing a glance at Lily's silhouette through the small window. The mare's head drooped, exhausted but alive, while the foal nestled close to her flank. Against all reason, a tiny seed of hope sprouted in Helen's heart. As the convoy left the far pasture, the wind began to die down. Clouds parted, allowing a warm beam of sunlight to bathe the trailer in a soft glow. From within, the foal let out a timid neigh, barely audible over the engine's hum. It was a sound that carried more promise than any speech or calculation of costs could measure, a fragile life holding on, refusing to be dismissed. For Helen, that single note of defiance was enough. She glanced at Martin, noticing a subtle shift in his posture, as if part of him was beginning to accept that this was no ordinary foal. Something about the newborn had claimed a place in his stubborn heart, even if he was the last to admit it. In the farmland's mid-morning hush, Martin carefully reversed the trailer into the barn's entrance while Helen stood by, guiding him with gestures. Lily and her newborn were still inside, their silhouettes outlined against the gloom of the trailer. Dr. Reeves, leaning against her station wagon, took stock of the surroundings. The aging barn had once housed a stable of livestock, but times had changed, leaving many stalls empty. Lily's arrival, along with the foal, would occupy a corner stall near the old tack room. With the trailer finally in position, Helen steeled herself for the next step. Helen motioned for Martin to kill the engine, and he obliged, stepping out with shoulders tense. Dr. Reeves nodded in silent approval as Helen unlatched the trailer door, revealing Lily's exhausted face and the foal's uncertain eyes. The veterinarian spoke softly. "We'll walk them inside together. No sudden moves." Martin shot Helen a glance, but said nothing. He took hold of the rope attached to Lily's halter while Dr. Reeves gently guided the foal. Every step was measured, as if one misstep could derail the peace they had just begun to establish. Lily wobbled, and Helen reached out instinctively. Once inside, Lily blinked under the light of the barn, the smell of straw and leather surrounding them. Dr. Reeves pointed to a vacant stall, its wooden walls marked by scratches and peeling paint. Helen opened the gate, Her heart heavy with anticipation, Martin guided Lily inside, the mare snorting at unfamiliar scents. The foal followed, stumbling in its unsteady walk. As soon as they settled, Helen spread a layer of clean straw while Dr. Reeves checked Lily's vital signs. Outside, the wind rattled the barn doors, a reminder of harsh surroundings. Inside, hope quietly and promise flickered. "She's holding steady," Dr. Reeves announced, stepping back after listening to Lily's heartbeat. "But I'd like to administer an antibiotic just in case. We can't risk infection right now." Helen nodded, aware that complications in birth could turn dire without warning. The vet produced a small syringe from her bag, filled it with medicine, and gently pressed it into Lily's flank. The mare flinched, but allowed the procedure. Meanwhile, Martin hovered by the stall door, arms crossed, unsure whether to voice approval or resentment. The foal let out a whicker, causing Helen to smile for the first time. "He's a little one," Dr. Reeves said, crouching to examine the foal. "I'd estimate he's a couple of weeks premature, but he's breathing well. Let's see if he'll nurse." She placed a hand on the foal's flank, guiding him toward Lily's side. Instinct took over. He sniffed the air, then latched onto Lily, drawing nourishment from her weary body. A hush fell in the stall, as though everyone realized how crucial this moment was. Lily let out a sigh, her eyes drifting shut in relief. Helen could sense Martin's gaze lingering on the scene, but neither spoke a word. Dr. Reeves wiped her hands on a cloth and turned to address them. "I'll need to come back this evening to check on them again. Lily must stay warm, hydrated, and stress-free. If you notice her appetite dropping, or if the foal stops nursing, call me away." She paused, her gaze lingering on Martin. "Try not to think of this as another expense. They're living creatures. Give them a chance." Martin clenched his jaw, giving a curt nod. Helen thanked the veterinarian, leading her to the barn door. Outside, the sun finally broke free. After Dr. Reeves left, Helen approached the stall again, mindful of Martin's presence behind her. "We'll need fresh straw and a heat lamp," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "I can see Lily's exhausted, but the foal seems hungry. Maybe we can spare some alfalfa to boost her milk." Martin let out a slow breath. "We don't have extra alfalfa lying around," he said. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "But I'll check the feed room. Might be some bales left over from last season." Helen offered a smile, noting the shift in his attitude. The day wore on in a blur of chores and optimism. Helen busied herself scrubbing old feed buckets, ensuring Lily had fresh water. Martin hauled bales of straw into the barn, grunting under the weight. He paused, peering into the stall where mother and foal rested. At midday, Helen found him standing there, arms at his sides, just watching. The foal attempted a shaky gallop in a circle, causing Lily to nicker in warning. Helen approached quietly, noticing Martin's expression softening despite himself. She felt a surge of relief that maybe, just maybe, they could face this challenge together. They broke for lunch in near silence, their kitchen illuminated by late morning sunlight. "I've been thinking," Helen began, setting down her mug of coffee. "What if we named the foal? He's already fought so hard to be here. I don't want to treat him like some commodity." Martin cleared his throat. For a moment, he said nothing, stirring his coffee. "A name," he repeated, as though the concept was foreign. He shrugged. "You're the one who's always fussed with that of thing. Name him whatever you like." Helen suppressed a smile, suspecting he was more invested than he let on. Returning to the barn, Helen stood by the stall, observing mother and baby. The foal tottered on its legs, each step a display of perseverance. "You made it through the night," she murmured, extending her hand toward the little creature. He sniffed her palm uncertainly, eventually pressing his muzzle against her fingers. In that instant, Helen felt a surge of protectiveness. "We'll call you Chance," she whispered, remembering how he was never expected to survive. Behind her, Lily nickered in what sounded like approval. Martin stepped in, eyeing the foal with curiosity. "Chance, huh?" he muttered, lips thinning slightly. The afternoon stretched on, with Dr. Reeves returning as promised to check Lily's vitals. "She's stable," the vet said, adjusting her stethoscope. "And Chance is doing well for a preemie. Keep him warm tonight. If the temperature drops, rig up an extra heat source." Helen nodded, relieved by the assessment. Martin hovered in the background, wrestling with his misgivings. The finances plagued him, and he found himself calculating feed costs, potential vet fees, and the ramifications of pouring resources into two uncertain lives. Each time he looked at the foal, something in him eased. The risk could be worth it. As dusk settled, Helen and Martin prepared the barn for the night. They gathered blankets, hanging them along the stall walls to block drafts. Martin wired a heat lamp in the corner, ensuring Lily and Chance stayed comfortable. Outside, a chill wind rustled the branches, and the moon rose high, casting faint silver light across the fields. The contrast between the frosty night and the barn's warm glow felt surreal to Helen, who stood there watching Lily nurse her new baby. She allowed hope to settle in her heart. Martin inhaled sharply, but remained silent, perhaps pondering the same optimism. Before heading to bed, Helen decided to check the barn once more. She slipped into her coat, flipping on a flashlight to guide her through the darkness. The animals stirred at her presence, but soon returned to their rhythms. As she approached Lily's stall, she found the mare lying down, eyes half closed, with Chance curled against her. Helen leaned over the wooden wall, watching the rise and fall of their breathing. Something about the scene filled her with awe. In that moment, worries about finances, harsh weather, and Martin's stubbornness receded. She whispered goodnight, flipping off the flashlight before stepping away. The next morning dawned under a pall of grey skies, casting a somber light across the farmland. Inside the barn, the air was still with anticipation. Lily remained in her stall, carefully keeping watch over the foal that Helen had lovingly named Chance. Even from a distance, Helen could see that Lily's breathing was shallow, and an unspoken worry gnawed at the edge of her mind. Lily was clearly not yet fully recovered from the arduous birth. Meanwhile, Martin busied himself in the corner, rearranging supplies and avoiding eye contact with Helen. Though he'd softened slightly upon seeing Chance in those first wobbly steps, he still seemed uneasy about having such a delicate situation on his already burdened shoulders. The barn felt claustrophobic with tension. The air smelled faintly metallic. Standing near Lily, Helen noticed the mare's ears twitch at every sound, as though she expected danger at any moment. Chance was curled up against Lily's flank, sleeping with delicate breaths that made his sides quiver. Helen leaned her elbows on the stall door and whispered softly, "How are you holding up, girl?" Lily responded by flicking her tail and letting out a gentle sigh. Despite her weariness, there was an unmistakable trace of resilience in her eyes. Helen reached over to pat the mare's neck, thinking of how much they still had to overcome. A moment later, Martin cleared his throat nearby, reminding her of everything still unsaid between them. The unspoken conflict lingered in the cool barn air, mingling with the soft rustle of straw under Chance's hooves. "Doc Reeves said she'd come by later today," Helen offered, turning to Martin with cautious hope. He nodded, his gaze flicking across Lily and Chance as though he couldn't decide whether to be proud or frustrated. "We've got chores to handle," he grumbled, pivoting toward the exit. Helen released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. For all his reluctance, Martin had rigged the heat lamp, helped bring Lily in from the field, and even offered an extra bale of alfalfa. Maybe, just maybe, his guarded heart was shifting. Helen stepped into the aisle, footsteps echoing against wooden rafters. She thought about how each small act of care proved that saving Lily was worth every risk. Outside, the sound of distant crows punctuated the morning while chants finally stirred. By midday, the sky had brightened, though a sharp chill remained. Martin and Helen worked side by side in tense silence, tending to the fields and feeding the chickens. Despite the routine, Helen's mind kept drifting back to Lily and Chance. She worried about potential setbacks, recalling horror stories of newborn foals who struggled with infections or failed to nurse. But every time apprehension coiled in her chest, she remembered the foal's determined eyes. Chance was small, yet his spirit seemed immense. Around lunchtime, Helen mustered the courage to mention the situation again. "Let's check on them," she said, wiping sweat from her brow. Martin shrugged, then muttered, "Fine." Their footsteps led them back to the barn, hearts pounding with concern. The closer they got, the quieter they became. Inside, the barn felt noticeably warmer compared to the crisp air outside. They found Lily standing on unsteady legs, attempting to nuzzle Chance toward a fresh patch of hay Helen had placed earlier. The foal, in turn, whinnied in a voice that sounded stronger than before. Martin lingered by the stall door, observing in silence. Helen stepped forward and rubbed Lily's muzzle, relieved to find her temperature reasonably stable. "She's holding up," Helen murmured, pressing her cheek to Lily's neck. The mare huffed gently, as if acknowledging Helen's presence. Behind them, Chance stumbled in a playful attempt to run. Despite the heartbreak of his beginnings, he seemed determined to explore every corner of his world. Outside, the wind rattled loose shingles, a reminder of the fragile life they now sheltered here. Around mid-afternoon, Dr. Reeves arrived with her trusty kit in hand. She greeted Helen and Martin curtly, then made a beeline for Lily's stall. After taking the mare's temperature and checking her pulse, she did the same for Chance. The foal eyed her warily but didn't resist. "They're both improving," she announced, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "Lily's appetite is decent and Chance seems alert." Helen exchanged a look with Martin. He gave a small nod, acknowledging their guarded relief. Dr. Reeves listened to Lily's breathing for a few more seconds before straightening. "Keep the stall clean and dry," she advised. "And give Lily plenty of rest. Let Chance roam, but don't let him out unsupervised." "He's still vulnerable out there in this weather," Martin exhaled, outwardly relieved. When Dr. Reeves wrapped up her visit, Helen decided to stay behind in the barn a while longer, brushing Lily and ensuring the water buckets were filled. Martin busied himself outside, hauling a few loose boards to repair a broken fence post. The sounds of hammering echoed through the property, a steady reminder of how much work always remained. Each clang blended with the soft rustle of straw inside the barn. Chance dozed off periodically, only to awaken with skittish curiosity. Helen laughed whenever he tried to trot around the stall, all legs and clumsy energy. Something about his innocence seemed to thaw the invisible barrier that lingered over this farm. Each time Helen looked at him, she felt oddly hopeful, as though life here might change for the better. As evening approached, clouds gathered overhead, threatening a light drizzle. Helen collected the necessary supplies to keep Lily's stall dry, adding fresh straw and checking the feed bin once more. She found Martin in the feed room, measuring out a portion of grain with meticulous precision. He glanced up when she entered, his expression tinged with resignation. "We're running short," he muttered. "Might have to call Johnson for another delivery." And that's money we don't really have. Helen set a hand on his shoulder. We'll figure it out, she said softly. She could sense the weight of his worry. Times were tough, but Chance and Lily needed them. Another clap of thunder sounded in the distance, a reminder that storms could come any day, hour. They had to be prepared. The rain arrived after dusk, pattering against the barn's tin roof. Helen and Martin sat on overturned buckets in the dim glow of a single lantern. Lily dozed in her stall, while Chance lay nestled beside her, his tiny sides rising and falling in slumber. We'll have to figure out what to do with him eventually, Martin said quietly. He can't just stay here forever, eating us out of house and home. Helen rubbed her hands together, the chill settling into her bones. I don't know, she replied. But I want him to have a chance at life. Somehow we'll manage. For a long minute, they listened to the rhythmic drops drumming overhead. At last, Martin sighed. I guess we'll see. His voice held her acceptance, echoing in the quiet. By the time the rain tapered off, it was nearly midnight, and fatigue weighed on them both. Helen stretched her stiff limbs, contemplating staying in the barn overnight, but she needed a few hours of proper rest. Let's head in, she said, rising from the bucket. Martin followed her out, lingering just long enough to glance back at Lily and Chance. In the darkness, the foal slept, oblivious to the sacrifices offered on his behalf. As they walked toward the house, Helen dared to place a hand on Martin's arm. Though he didn't pull away, she sensed the tension coiled within him. Yet for all his resistance, he had helped save Lily and Chance. Helen believed this choice would change their lives. Neither could predict. She prayed it was true. In the days that followed Lily's triumphant rescue from the far pasture, Helen found her life consumed by a new and unexpected purpose. She awakened each morning to the gentle nicker of the mare and the delicate whinny of the foal, hearts beating in a precarious harmony. Chance had begun to reveal traces of a spirited personality, kicking at stray bits of straw and nosing at Helen's pockets as though expecting treats. Lily, though still gaunt and weary, improved steadily under Dr. Reeves's guidance. The once-forgotten barn, which had felt so lifeless, now vibrated with the slow vitality of mother and child. Despite the glimmers of optimism, Helen sensed Martin's unspoken worries. Every purchase of feed and medication gnawed at him, and each passing day chipped away at their savings. One brisk morning, Helen rose before dawn to gather eggs from the chicken coop and deliver Lily's feed. She found the mare standing with a new resolve, her gaze following Chance's every antic as he explored the boundaries of the stall. The foal's growth, though subtle, was evident in his more confident steps and stronger nursing. Despite that reassurance, Helen still couldn't ignore the tension etched into Martin's shoulders. When she caught him staring at the rusted tractor in the yard, she guessed he was calculating the cost of repairs against the price of the horse supplies. Even so, Martin quietly helped rig a better heat lamp for the stall, muttering that it was best to prevent pneumonia. Beneath his gruff exterior, Helen sensed a genuine fatherly protectiveness toward Chance. Dr. Reeves continued her routine visits, occasionally bringing small vials of vitamins that she administered to Lily. Each time, she praised the mare's fortitude and Chance's spirited resilience. Helen would beam at every encouraging word, while Martin hovered in the background. Unbeknownst to them, word of Lily and Chance's miraculous survival began circulating among the nearby farms. A traveling feed salesman mentioned spotting an unlikely duo, a weakened mare and her diminutive foal, thriving at a place where many believed they had no chance at all. Though Martin claimed he detested gossip, Helen could tell he felt a quiet pride when neighbors asked about that wonder foal. Even the local postman started chatting about the newborn, turning every mail drop into an opportunity for updates on Lily's recovery. News spread astonishingly quickly. Still, not everyone was thrilled. One afternoon, as Helen swept the barn's dirt floor, Martin stomped in with a grim expression. He clutched a crumpled piece of paper, a fresh notice from their feed supplier about rising costs. Helen's heart sank at the sight. Even the smallest price increase felt insurmountable, given their dwindling resources. She set the broom aside, gently asking what they should do next. Martin heaved a long sigh, admitting that his early harvest projections looked bleak. Bad weather had ravaged some fields, leaving them short on both hay and potential income. While Lily and Chance thrived, the farm's finances teetered on the brink. "We can't keep this up forever," Martin muttered, though his gaze flickered toward the stall where Chance scuffed the straw in endearing, playful curiosity. Helen tried not to dwell on their precarious finances as she resumed her daily tasks, but that night she lay awake, listening to the wind whip around the farmhouse. It carried the distant hum of restless cattle, a reminder of how heavily each animal depended on them. Thoughts of Lily and Chance seeped into her dreams. She pictured the foal braving the dark, his tiny nostrils flaring in alarm. By daybreak, Helen resolved to do something proactive. After ensuring Lily was fed and Chance had nursed, she made a phone call to an old friend who ran a volunteer animal shelter. Though the shelter mainly cared for stray dogs and cats, Helen asked whether they had any connections to grants or donations. Anything, she hoped, to ease the mounting pressure. Late that afternoon, the friend from the shelter called back with encouraging news. While they didn't have direct funds for horses, they knew a non-profit that specialized in supporting small farms with emergency vet bills. Helen scribbled down the details, her pulse quickening. As soon as she hung up, she rushed to share this ray of hope with Martin. She found him repairing the faulty water pump in their backyard, his hands grimy with rust. At first, he grimaced, suspecting another cost. But when Helen mentioned the possibility of financial help, Martin's shoulders finally relaxed. "Anything would help," he acknowledged quietly. Later, over a hastily prepared dinner, they discussed the application requirements, proof of ownership, vet statements, and a budget outline. It wasn't guaranteed, but it was a promising start. That night, Helen combed through receipts and scribbled calculations across scrap paper, trying to piece together an honest picture of their finances. She recalled the cost of Lily's antibiotics, the grain for Chance, and every extra bale of straw. Meanwhile, Martin prepared a modest ledger for farm expenses, wincing at how the numbers failed to align. Outside, a moonlit hush settled over the fields, broken only by the distant rustle of nocturnal creatures. Hours passed as they pored over figures, searching for any solution. At one point, Martin glanced up with the expression, "We might need to sell a piece of equipment," he muttered. Helen's pen paused mid-sentence, but she nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. If that was the price of keeping Lily and Chance, so be it. Dawn broke with a faint glow, and Helen stumbled outside to check the barn, fighting fatigue. Inside, Lily raised her head in welcome, while Chance bounded around her legs, full of energy that belied his precarious start. Helen leaned over the stall door, a swirl of exhaustion and gratitude washing over her. In that moment, she remembered why they fought so hard. Watching Chance's bright eyes and Lily's protective warmth reminded her that life could overcome even the bleakest outlook. She gave them fresh water and ensured the bedding was dry. Then, stepping back, Helen nearly collided with Martin, who had entered silently. "He sure doesn't act like a struggling foal," he murmured, some unrecognizable emotion in his voice. Helen took a steadying breath. "No," she said softly. "He's determined. The next few days blended together in a flurry of activity. Helen mailed off the grant application, double-checked with Dr. Reeves about any lingering risks for Chance, and continued to juggle typical farm chores. Martin repaired fences damaged by gusty winds, muttering under his breath about overdue bills. Despite the stress, small moments of joy caught them off guard. A playful nudge from Chance, a soft nicker from Lily when Helen entered with fresh feed. Those fleeting instants of tenderness became the glue that held them together, reminding them why this sacrifice was worth making. Even the barn cats seemed to sense something special, curling up near Lily's stall at night. A quiet determination settled over the farm, as though Lily and Chance's survival had sparked a deeper resilience in everyone. One evening, just after sundown, Helen lingered at the barn to brush Lily's coat and say goodnight to Chance. The foal leaned into her touch, eyes half closed in contentment. Soft lantern light warmed the space, illuminating Lily's gentle gaze. Footsteps sounded behind Helen, and she turned to see Martin standing there with a folded blanket in hand. Without a word, he draped it over the stall's drafty corner. The hush between them said more than any conversation. For a moment, they stood side by side, watching Chance fumble with an errant piece of straw. Then Martin cleared his throat. "He's growing strong," he noted, voice subdued. Helen nodded, her hand resting on Lily's mane. "He is," she agreed quietly, feeling a renewed spark of hope steady her deeply tired heart. It was near day's end when Helen stepped onto the porch, steaming mug in hand, eyes scanning the sky's gathering clouds. Winter loomed, and every chore felt pressed by an urgency they hadn't known before. The orchard's bare branches rattled, reminding her how soon the ground would freeze solid. Chickens needed shelter, the cattle needed feed, and Lily and Chance demanded constant care. Yet a fleeting calm stirred in Helen as she surveyed the fields, recalling how they'd mailed that grant application. She sipped her coffee, praying they'd secure a future for the fragile mare and her foal. A moment later, she heard Martin's footsteps behind her. He set a toolbox down, expression tense. But whenever he glanced at the barn, Helen saw a hint of hope flicker across his features. They walked to the barn together, boots crunching on frosty gravel. An icy breeze carried the scent of stale hay, and pale light spilled through the barn door. Inside Lily's stall, Chance looked up, ears swiveling curiously. Lily flicked her tail in a silent welcome. Martin leaned on the stall door, arms folded. "He's filling out," he noted with reluctant pride. Chance seemed steadier every day, his once wobbly knees supporting small bursts of energy. Lily, though thin, appeared stronger too, lifting her head with a quiet dignity that spoke of relief. Helen grabbed a brush and ran it along Lily's coat, the repetitive motion calming her worries. Overhead, a single bulb swung gently, illuminating Lily's dark eyes as she offered Helen a tired but trusting stare. Helen had just finished brushing Lily when her phone buzzed. Seeing the non-profits number, her heart lurched. Stepping from the stall, she answered in a rush. A polite voice explained they needed more records. Vet statements, detailed finances, all due soon. Helen jotted notes on a feed bag scrap. "Of course," she murmured, fighting a surge of panic. When the call ended, she faced Martin's questioning stare. "They just want more paperwork," she said. "Nothing final yet." He exhaled slowly. "Figures," he muttered, turning back to Chance. Helen's hopes wavered. They needed help fast, and each delay felt like a storm cloud. Outside, the late afternoon sun dipped behind grayish clouds, darkening the barn's narrow aisles. The next morning dawned with an icy drizzle. Martin scattered salt on the slick path while Helen hurried behind him, hands full of feed buckets. The fields looked ghostly under a film of frozen dew. Inside the barn, Chance attempted a daring trot around Lily, who watched him with quiet vigilance. Helen felt some relief at his vigor, but finances haunted her thoughts. She set up a makeshift table in the tack room, spreading out receipts and Dr. Reeves's notes. Martin joined her, scraping mud off his boots. Together they tallied feed costs, vet bills, and urgent repairs. Tension thickened the air, each figure reminding them how fragile their hold on the farm was. Now, their biggest hope lay in convincing a distant non-profit that Lily and Chance deserved more time. All afternoon, rain drummed the barn's tin roof, an unrelenting downpour that matched their weary mood. Helen and Martin huddled over battered ledgers, cross-referencing every purchase for Lily's medicines, every bale of straw. Occasionally, Martin stretched his back and peered into the stall, as if checking on Lily could ease his frustration. Helen noticed how the mare would flick her ears at his presence, acknowledging him gently. Chance took the distraction as an invitation to nibble Martin's jacket. He jumped back, startled, then stifled a chuckle. Helen saw his guarded smile from where she worked, and hope flickered. Maybe their shared resolve to save this pair was mending more than Lily's health. With the final receipt logged, they closed the ledgers, exhaustion tugging at both of them. When they finished compiling the folder, Martin held it with a frown. "This is everything," he said, setting it aside. Helen touched his arm. "We'll make it work," she whispered, though doubt gnawed at her. A sudden gust rattled the barn door, sending a chill through them. Martin dropped the folder on a small table. "I'll drive into town tomorrow," he said. "Get these scanned and sent." Helen nodded, recalling his earlier aversion to modern technology. That he'd adapt now spoke volumes. Outside, the daylight waned. They walked the barn's aisle, passing stalls filled with quiet animals. Loose boards and patched wiring told the story of a farm worn thin by time. Yet Lily and Chance's stall glowed under a single lamp, a testament to what little hope remained. Night settled with a low rumble of thunder. Helen fed Lily a bit of hay, then paused to watch Chance tug playfully at the blanket in the corner. Lily, unamused, nudged him back to her side. Martin fiddled with the heat lamp's angle, ensuring the stall stayed cozy against the creeping cold. "At least they're warm," he said, voice subdued. Helen brushed her palm along Lily's neck. The mare closed her eyes, leaning gently into the contact. "We've come so far already," Helen whispered, half to herself. Her fingers tingled with the day's chill, but inside her chest a warmth swelled. Just as they turned to leave, Chance let out a tiny neigh, causing them both to glance back. In that moment, the storm outside felt distant, replaced by the love they shared for a young life they had almost abandoned. Outside, wind gusts pressed them toward the house. The path shone with puddles reflecting starlight where the clouds had thinned. Martin walked beside Helen in silence, yet she sensed the shift in him. He was no longer merely tolerating Lily and Chance. He seemed determined to protect them. At the porch steps, he paused. "If that grant doesn't come through," he began, then trailed off. Helen swallowed, nodding. They both knew what it might mean. Selling equipment, or worse, giving up on the animals they'd fought so hard to save. "We'll handle it," she said softly. Martin pressed his lips together, then reached for the door handle. The warmth of the house enveloped them, but as Helen glanced back, she pictured Lily and Chance curled in their stall, each breath forging a fragile tomorrow. No matter the outcome, something profound had changed here. A little foal had kindled a spark in them both. Later that night, as the wind hissed at the window panes, Helen lay awake, recalling every hardship they had endured. Images of Chance's first steps mingled with her fears of looming debts. Yet she held fast to one truth. They had already chosen compassion once, and they would do it again. In the hush that followed the night's downpour, Helen woke with a hollow ache in her chest. She glanced at the clock on her bedside table. 5:30. The same hour she rose each day to check on Lily and Chance. For a moment, she lay still, remembering how she drifted off worrying about the grant application and their ever-growing list of expenses. But the barn beckoned with urgent insistence. Slipping out of bed, she carefully avoided waking Martin, pulled on a coat over her pajamas, and trudged out into the pale light that precedes dawn. A cold wind tugged at her hair, and overhead, thin slivers of moonlight still clung to the retreating darkness. She found the barn eerily quiet, the usual rustle of animals muted by lingering exhaustion from the rain. At Lily's stall, her breath caught in her throat. The mare stood with legs slightly splayed, as if bracing herself, while Chance dozed beneath her. Helen's heart thudded with alarm. Lily's breathing sounded ragged, her eyes half-lidded with fatigue. A pang of dread made Helen approach, slowly. She reached out to stroke Lily's neck, feeling a damp warmth that hinted at fever. Chance stirred, blinking awake, and let out a soft neigh as though sensing his mother's discomfort. Helen whispered gentle reassurance, wishing she'd brought her phone with her. Slipping into the tack room, Helen found the small medkit Dr. Reeves had left, rummaging for the thermometer. It took patience and coaxing to measure Lily's temperature, but Helen managed. The reading made her stomach lurch, several degrees above normal. She ran her hand down Lily's flank, where the mare flinched ever so slightly. Anxiety mounted. Lily had seemed stronger in recent days, but now she appeared drained, as if the lingering chill from the storm had seeped into her bones. With the sky only just beginning to lighten, Helen knew she couldn't wait until the usual vet hours. Lily needed prompt attention. Heart pounding, Helen fumbled for the phone she had left charging on the kitchen counter. She bolted back to the house, slapping on the lights and scrambling to find Dr. Reeves's number. Martin trudged in from the hallway, still groggy, startled by her frantic movements. "What's going on?" he demanded, voice rough with sleep. "It's Lily," Helen said, forcing her tone to stay calm. "She's got a fever, and she's acting off." Martin swore under his breath, pulling on his boots and a heavier jacket. While Helen made the call, he rushed out to the barn. The line rang twice before Dr. Reeves answered, even half asleep. The vet's concerns sparked immediately at Helen's hurried explanation. "I'll be there soon," Dr. Reeves promised, voice crackling through the weak connection. "Keep her warm, see if she'll drink water. Don't let the foal nurse too vigorously if Lily's in pain." When Helen returned to the stall, she found Martin gently pressing a blanket to Lily's side. Chance stood off to one corner, stamping his small hooves as though protesting the commotion. Lily's eyes flicked open at Helen's arrival, her flank trembling with exertion. Martin glanced over, his expression grim. "She's burning up," he muttered. "Never seen her this weak." Together, they coaxed Lily to sip water from a bucket, but she only managed a few laps before turning away. Helen laid a hand over the mare's ribs, feeling them expand with strained breaths. She tried to project calm, stroking Lily's muzzle, murmuring words of comfort. Chance sidled closer, peering at his mother anxiously. All around, the faint sounds of other animals stirring seemed to hold a collective breath, as though the entire barn sensed Lily's distress. Less than an hour later, Dr. Reeves arrived, her station wagon crunching over wet gravel. She rushed inside, hair disheveled beneath a wool hat, stethoscope already in her grip. Martin and Helen stepped aside, watching with mounting fear as the vet took Lily's temperature again and listened to her heart. "Doctor." Reeves's brow furrowed. "Her lungs are clear, but she's definitely got an infection," she announced, pulling a syringe from her bag. "Could be postpartum complications, or maybe a secondary issue from last week's exhaustion. Let's give her a stronger antibiotic." Within moments, she administered the shot, Lily flinching at the needle's prick. Chance let out a fearful squeal, pressing his tiny body against Lily's hind leg. Helen hugged herself, shivering despite the barn's warmth. "Will she be okay?" she whispered. Dr. Reeves pushed a hand through her hat's brim, exhaling. "I think so, if we act quickly," she said. "But we have to be careful. She might not want to eat, and she needs the strength to keep producing milk, keep her stress low, keep her warm, monitor her temperature every couple of hours. I can come back tonight, or you can call me sooner if she takes a turn for the worse." Martin pressed his lips together, gaze fixed on Lily's labored breathing. "We'll do whatever it takes," he said, voice subdued. True to her word, Dr. Reeves left a detailed list of instructions, along with vials of antibiotics for follow-up doses. Then she set off for another farm that also needed her help, promising to return before nightfall. Helen stood in the aisle, instructions clutched in her hands, while Martin took them from her gently, scanning the text. The cost of these medications wouldn't be small. She knew it, and so did he, but neither spoke of it aloud. Lily's life mattered more in that moment than any ledger or bank account. Chance pawed at the straw, blinking his wide eyes at the humans who seemed so distraught. Helen reached over and let him nuzzle her wrist. "You're safe," she whispered, not sure if she was trying to reassure the foal or herself. The day unfolded in tense increments. Every hour, Helen or Martin checked Lily's temperature, coaxed her to drink water, or offered her spoonfuls of molasses in warm oatmeal. Sometimes she showed a flicker of interest, and they celebrated those small victories. Other times, she turned her head away, too worn to respond. Chance tried to nurse, but Martin gently pulled him back whenever Lily showed signs of pain. By late afternoon, Lily's fever had edged down a fraction, though her eyes remained dull with fatigue. Dr. Reeves returned briefly at dusk, confirming a slight improvement and administering another dose of antibiotics. "Just keep a close watch," she cautioned, gaze swinging between Helen and Martin. "You're doing all you can." That evening, Helen set up a cot in the barn's corner, determined not to leave Lily alone overnight. She gathered pillows and blankets, while Martin brought in a space heater to fight off the dropping temperatures. The hum of it filled the barn with a faint warmth, pushing back the chill of approaching winter. As Helen settled on the cot, she heard Martin rustling around near the stall, muttering about how they'd better not blow a fuse with all this electricity running. Yet beneath his grumbles, she detected that fierce concern he carried now for Lily's well-being. Chance lay curled up at Lily's forelegs, occasionally lifting his head to gaze at Helen across the aisle. Around midnight, Helen startled awake to the sound of Lily pawing at the stall floor. Heart pounding, she clicked on a small flashlight. Lily stood with ears pricked, no longer lying down as she'd done earlier. Her sides rose and fell with shaky but determined breaths. Chance, roused by his mother's movement, moved to nurse. This time, Lily allowed it. Relief coursed through Helen as the foal latched on, drawing nourishment that Helen feared might vanish if Lily's health deteriorated. Slowly, Helen approached the stall door, shining the flashlight. Lily blinked in the glow, then resumed her protective stance over Chance. Though still weak, she seemed anchored by maternal instinct. Helen's eyes misted with gratitude. Though Lily wasn't out of danger, this simple act, letting Chance nurse, showed that her will to survive persisted. Feeling the chill in her limbs, Helen grabbed a blanket and draped it over her shoulders, whispering encouragement to the mare. The wind gusted beyond the barn, rattling the eaves, but Lily no longer appeared anxious. For the next hour, Helen hovered there, stroking Lily's mane in the half-light, lulled by the comforting presence of mother and foal. It was a moment she would keep etched in her memory. Lily's stubborn heartbeat, Chance's steady swallowing, and the hush of a farm united by hope. When dawn finally broke, Helen rose stiffly from her makeshift bed. She checked Lily's temperature again, back to near normal. A wave of relief washed over her so powerfully that she nearly dropped the thermometer. A second check confirmed it. The infection had, at least for now, receded under the antibiotics' power. Lily's eyes, though rimmed with weariness, shone with a calm acceptance. Outside the stall, Martin arrived, hair tousled, a mug of coffee in his hand. He saw Helen's expression and exhaled in gratitude. "Thank God," he murmured. For once, no further words were needed. Lily had fought through the night, and Chance had not been robbed of his mother. The early morning light filtered into the barn, painting Lily's stall with soft streaks of gold. Helen pressed a hand over her heart, still exhilarated by the relief that Lily's fever had abated overnight. She could see that the mare, though tired, now lifted her head with renewed energy, and even gave a brief whinny of greeting. Chance took that as a cue to dance around on spindly legs, as though celebrating his mother's resilience. Helen glanced at Martin, who stood beside her with coffee in hand. The lines of worry etched on his face were still present, but a gentle warmth had replaced the fear that once dominated his every look. He offered a nod, a silent but powerful sign that, for the moment, optimism outshone their anxieties. As the day blossomed, the entire farm seemed transformed by Lily's revival. Instead of the brittle tension that had lingered, a cautious hope permeated the air. Helen made her customary rounds, scattering feed for the chickens, checking on the cows in their pasture, and verifying the hay supply. Every so often, she found her thoughts drifting back to the barn. Each time she peered inside, she saw Lily standing tall, ears perked, while Chance nursed without hesitation. The antibiotic regimen still had to continue, but Dr. Reeves had assured them that a steady improvement was now more likely than a setback. Breathing easier than she had in days, Helen felt a spark of gratitude for each small victory. Martin busied himself near the tractor shed, finalizing repairs he had postponed when Lily's health took a dire turn. He wanted to get the machine running before winter truly set in, since clearing snow by hand was simply impossible on acreage this large. Though his tasks were urgent, he found himself pausing more than once, gazing in the barn's direction. Every time he heard Chance's playful squeal drift through the open doors, he felt a curious tug in his chest. It was as if the foal's youthful exuberance reminded him that there were joys beyond constant burdens. Soon, Martin wiped his brow, satisfied that he'd done enough for one afternoon, and meandered back to check on Lily and Chance once more. He found Helen in the barn aisle, meticulously sweeping away stray bits of hay. Even in these mundane chores, she radiated a quiet determination that Martin had come to admire. She turned when she heard him step inside. "I'm going to give Lily her next dose soon," Helen said, gesturing at a small container of antibiotic powder. "We can mix it into a mash. Dr. Reeves said that should make it easier for her to eat." Martin eyed Lily's stall. The mare seemed calmer than ever, and Chance, perched at her side, perked his ears. "She looks like she's half-rested," he murmured. Helen nodded. "It's a good sign. Let's keep her that way." Together, they prepared the mash, a mixture of warm water, bran, and the prescribed antibiotic. Lily sniffed at it hesitantly when offered, but Helen coaxed her with gentle pats on the neck. Chance, intrigued by the bowl, bobbed his head and nearly toppled it. Martin let out a sudden laugh, an unfamiliar sound in these tense times, which startled both Lily and Helen. Regaining composure, he stepped back, allowing Helen to continue feeding the mare. "That little rascal has more energy every day," he commented under his breath. Helen smiled. "He does, and she's protecting him like never before. I think that motherly bond is fueling her strength too." The barn light glowed around them, reminiscent of a small sanctuary. Throughout the afternoon, Lily ate in small, measured portions, taking breaks to rest as Chance bounded around in clumsy circles. Occasionally, the foal wandered outside the stall, sniffing at old rakes or the corners of dusty bales. Helen had to gently guide him back, unwilling to let him wander too far in the barn's open spaces. While the infection scare still haunted them, Lily's progress cast the day in a hopeful light. Her eyes, once dulled by fever, now shone with the quiet fierceness Helen remembered. She seemed grateful for every nuzzle from Chance, accepting each moment of closeness with renewed appreciation. Martin watched them, arms folded, the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. Near dusk, Helen and Martin met in the kitchen to discuss the next steps. The grant application still loomed, and they hadn't heard anything definitive. "I'll call the organization tomorrow," Helen said, flipping through her notes. "Maybe they can at least give us a timeline." Martin nodded, setting a kettle on the stove. "We'll need to start figuring out hay deliveries for December. We're still short, even with Lily's appetite not fully recovered." A heaviness settled between them. Though Lily's condition had improved, the reality of sustaining the farm remained daunting. But tonight, with Lily's fever gone, that weight felt a bit more manageable. Helen rose to retrieve 2 mugs, determined to savor what relief they could. As they sipped tea, Helen recounted Chance's antics, how he'd tried to nibble on Martin's jacket, or how he'd startled a barn cat with a sudden hop. She found herself laughing, a lightness in her voice that had been absent for weeks. Martin, typically reserved, cracked a genuine grin. "He's got spirit, reminds me of that colt we had years ago, before—" His voice trailed off, overshadowed by a memory too painful to name. Helen reached out, covering his hand gently. Neither spoke, but the silence hummed with understanding. They carried scars from past losses, and these new joys felt fragile. But life went on, and they were choosing to embrace it once more. Outside, the final rays of sun vanished, and the wind rattled the window panes. Night descended swiftly, wrapping the farmland in quiet darkness. Before heading to bed, they checked on Lily one more time. Lantern in hand, Helen led the way through the chilly night air. Their breath formed small clouds in front of them, and the worn barn door groaned in protest when Martin pulled it open. Inside, Lily appeared half asleep, eyelids drooping contentedly. Chance, fully asleep, lay nestled in straw at her feet, his little muzzle twitching. Helen quietly changed Lily's water and rearranged the straw for extra warmth. Martin tested the heat lamp, ensuring everything was secure. They left feeling satisfied that mother and foal were at peace. The next day came bright and clear, sunlight flashing over frost-laced fields. Helen rose early, determined to contact the non-profit. Her nerves jangled as she punched in the number. After several rings, an administrative assistant picked up. Within minutes, Helen found herself explaining Lily's precarious start, Chance's unlikely survival, and the recent infection scare. The assistant listened patiently, then promised an update soon. When Helen hung up, Martin's eyes flickered with anticipation. "We've done everything they asked, right?" he probed. "Yes," Helen answered, voice tight. "All we can do now is wait." That day, Lily ambled around the barn aisle for short walks while Chance tagged along. Each step felt triumphant, and even Martin couldn't hide his relief. Late in the afternoon, as they stowed equipment, the phone rang. Helen rushed to answer, heart thundering in her chest. The non-profit representative spoke in calm, measured tones. No final decision yet, but they were reviewing the files thoroughly. Relief mingled with impatience. At least they weren't out of the running. Twilight found them back in the barn, brush and feed in hand. Lily nibbled from Martin's bucket, pausing to check on Chance. The foal hopped around, discovering fresh hay like treasure. Helen savored the sight, a mother's gentle watchfulness, a farm fighting to stay alive, and a fragile unity growing daily. In that hush, they all seemed closer than ever, together. Hope took root again. Helen woke to the faint light of dawn and a knot of anticipation in her stomach. The phone call from the non-profit the previous day had left her both hopeful and anxious. She pulled on her boots and coat, then crept outside to see what winter's early chill had brought. The fields glistened with pale frost, each blade of grass catching the dawn's light like a scattering of tiny crystals. She breathed in the sharp, cold air and made her way to the barn, relief washing over her at the sight of a faint, warm glow through a crack in the door. She and Martin had taken to leaving a lamp burning through the night, partly for Lily's benefit and partly for their own peace of mind. The moment Helen slipped inside, Lily lifted her head, ears forward in greeting. The mare appeared stronger with each passing day. Chance, sprawled in a patch of straw, roused at Helen's footsteps. Letting out a short whinny, he wobbled upright, shook himself, and bounded to his mother's side. Helen leaned on the stall door, filled with gratitude at the harmony they had achieved. Lily no longer seemed haunted by her infection, and though she remained somewhat lean, her eyes gleamed with curiosity. Chance, already sprouting a thicker winter coat, charmed Helen with his playful antics. He nipped at Lily's mane, tested his footing, then gave a determined little hop that nearly sent him tumbling into the feed bucket Helen carried. After dispensing Lily's morning ration, still laced with a dwindling supply of antibiotics, Helen slipped away to tend the other animals. The cows flicked their ears in silent thanks as she distributed fresh hay. The chickens pecked furiously at scattered grain. Each chore felt easier with the knowledge that Lily and Chance were safe. Martin joined her halfway through, greeting the livestock with brief nods. He rarely wasted words, especially when wrapped in morning's frigid air, yet his eyes carried the same spark she felt. As they finished, Helen brushed a wisp of frost from his jacket. "We'll hear something soon," she said. Martin met her gaze with a solemn nod, then turned his attention to the orchard where barren trees waited for spring. At midday, an overcast sky threatened snow, and Helen ducked into the house to make calls. She reached the non-profit's office, but got transferred to an automated system. The sterile recording made her skin prickle with dread. Reluctantly, she left a message, trying to keep her voice steady while asking for an update on their grant. Then she placed the phone on the countertop, restless energy buzzing in her limbs. Outside the window, Martin was hauling old boards to patch a damaged fence. If the storm came, they needed everything sealed and secure. She considered going out to help, but her thoughts kept drifting to Lily's next feeding and Chance's lively spirit. Instead, she stuffed a pair of gloves in her coat pocket and returned to the barn. Lily greeted Helen with a soft exhale, pressing her muzzle to Helen's hand. The mare's temperature remained stable, and she had consumed nearly all her mash from breakfast. Chance, enthralled by his new ability to trot about without stumbling, tested each corner of the stall. Helen laughed when he discovered a stray brush, toppling it over as though it were a grand conquest. While she was brushing Lily's coat, footsteps echoed in the aisle. She turned to see Martin approaching with a stack of fresh straw. "Might snow tonight," he remarked, voice low. "Figured they could use an extra layer." Helen smiled, stepping aside so he could spread it out. Chance watched him closely, then made a clumsy leap onto the straw pile. Martin shook his head but let a smile slip. As dusk crept nearer, Helen and Martin decided to allow Lily and Chance a brief supervised walk outside the barn. Carefully, They guided the pair through the wide doors and into the fenced area adjoining the pasture. The sky was a muted grey, and a light wind brushed across Lily's coat. Chance, sensing the openness, trotted with newfound enthusiasm. Though he never ventured more than a few feet away from Lily, Helen noted with relief that the mare's gait, while still reserved, seemed steady. A week ago, Lily had hovered at the brink, but now she moved with confidence. Martin hung back by the fence, silent pride visible in the way he observed mother and foal exploring the small patch of grass that survived the autumn's chill. They didn't stay out long. The temperature dropped noticeably, and Lily showed signs of fatigue after several minutes. So Helen led them back inside, where the glow of lanterns and the promise of warm straw awaited. The wind picked up, rattling the barn doors, and overhead the first tentative flakes of snow drifted past the rafters. It felt like a warning that the seasons were changing faster than they could manage. They settled Lily and Chance in their stall, triple-checking the water supply, feed and extra blankets. All the while, Helen's mind looped to the possibility that tomorrow might bring a phone call. Her breath caught at the thought, if they were denied funding, where would that leave them? By the time darkness fully enveloped the farm, snow was falling in earnest, blanketing the yard in an icy hush. Helen fixed a simple dinner while Martin stoked the fireplace. They exchanged few words, each pondering the same unspoken worry about the grant. After washing the dishes, Helen stole back to the barn with a thermos of warm water, intending to help Lily stay hydrated. She found Lily awake, blinking at the drifting snow visible through a small window. Chance was curled in a tight circle, oblivious to the flakes swirling just feet away. Helen touched Lily's mane gently. "You're safe here," she murmured. "We'll figure this out." She was so engrossed that she didn't notice Martin at first, standing behind her with arms folded. "Storm's worse than I expected," he said softly. "Forecast says it might last through morning." Helen nodded, her pulse quickening as she thought of the orchard, the fields and their dwindling supplies. Yet Lily and Chance didn't deserve worry. They deserved warmth. She handed Martin the thermos so he could pour some water into Lily's bucket. They lingered longer than usual in the stall, lulled by the gentle hush of the snowfall. Chance woke briefly, blinking with sleepy curiosity, before settling against Lily once more. That night, the wind howled with a vengeance, battering the farmhouse until the windows shuddered. Helen hardly slept, visions of Lily's precarious condition haunting her. When morning finally arrived, the scene outside revealed a world gone white. Drifts of snow piled against fences, and the drive to town looked impassable without serious effort. Martin peered out the window, scowling. "Going anywhere's going to be tough," he muttered. Helen sighed. If the nonprofit decided to call, the weather wouldn't matter, but if the line went down, they might miss the news entirely. With forced resolve, she bundled up for barn chores, stepping carefully through shin-high snow. Her breath rose in small clouds, and the cold stung her cheeks. Inside the barn, Lily and Chance stood quietly. The mare's nose was dusted with bits of straw, and the foal watched as Helen approached. It took her a moment to realize that Martin had arrived first, a fresh bale of hay already stacked neatly, and Lily's bucket full of water. Helen felt a wave of gratitude for his diligence, even if it went unspoken. They wordlessly inspected Lily's stall, verifying no drafts snuck in through the aged boards. Snow had crept under the doors, forming miniature drifts that threatened to soak the straw. Martin brushed them away before Helen laid down more bedding. Their synergy in that moment felt almost comforting, as though the storm's fury compelled them to stand united for Lily and Chance's sake. With the morning feeding complete, Helen and Martin trudged back to the house, stamping snow off their boots. The phone's silence was deafening, but Helen couldn't bring herself to call the non-profit again so soon. Instead, she brewed coffee while Martin sorted through leftover feed receipts, hoping for any sign that finances might balance. The muffled whistle of the wind outside made the house feel claustrophobic. At midday, Helen returned to the barn with bowls of bran mash. Lily nickered upon seeing her, and Chance trotted in excited circles as if oblivious to the howling gale beyond their wooden shelter. As dusk fell, the snow showed no sign of letting up. Helen's heart sank. They might be snowed in for another day, or perhaps more, which threatened to derail the entire farm's delicate routine. Martin tried clearing a path with the tractor, but returned half an hour later, ice crusting his jacket and eyebrows. "It's too deep," he reported grimly, parking the tractor inside a rickety shed. The swirling flakes made everything look eerie and endless. But every concern about the orchard or the roads paled when Helen remembered how close Lily had been to death. No matter how the storm raged, Lily and Chance were still here, safe for now. Before bedtime, Helen and Martin braved the blizzard one last time to check on mother and foal. The lantern's yellow glow cut through darkness as they stepped into the barn. Lily dozed, leaning her weight against the stall's wooden slats. Chance slept curled at her side, lulled by her slow breathing. Helen topped off the water bucket and offered Lily a gentle pat. In the hush, Martin reached over to brush a stray piece of hay from Chance's flank. For an instant, mother, father, mare, and foal seemed bound by a silent promise to endure whatever storms loomed, in hope that tomorrow might bring word of a helping hand. If not, they would persevere anyway, together. Morning arrived, cloaked in a pale hush, revealing that the snowfall had persisted through the night. Helen shuffled to the window and peered out. The farmhouse was encased in a glimmering blanket of white. Icicles hung from the eaves like daggers, and the fence posts were nearly submerged in drifts. She glanced at the silent phone on the kitchen counter, heart pounding at the possibility that the non-profit might call with a final decision. Without waiting for coffee, she bundled into her thickest coat and braved the cold to reach the barn. Each crunching step reminded her of the delicate balance they all lived in. Winter's grip on one side, the urgent hope for Lily and Chance on the other. Inside the barn, golden lamplight chased away some of the gloom. Lily stood quietly, her breath curling in soft clouds. Chance was awake and playful, greeting Helen with a soft whinny as she approached the stall. Helen exhaled in gratitude. Despite the storm, mother and foal appeared well. The mare lifted her head when Helen ran a hand down Lily's flank, a gentle gesture of reassurance. In one corner of the stall lay a generous patch of fresh straw Martin must have set out before dawn. Helen could still see faint traces of his footprints in the aisle, evidence of his devotion, even if he rarely voiced it. She opened the feed bucket and set it near Lily, watching the mare dip her muzzle with a quiet trust that signaled how far they'd come. Back in the house, Martin was fiddling with the radio, attempting to catch a weather report. Static crackled until a faint voice emerged, warning that roads were virtually impassable. Sighing, he switched it off. Helen placed a mug of coffee beside him. "We could still try calling the non-profit," she offered, though she knew the landline's wires could be weighed down by snow. Martin gave a nod, rising to inspect the phone. A brief dial tone hummed in the receiver, then cut to a burst of static. Disappointment coiled in Helen's chest. She set her shoulders determinedly. "Let's keep trying," she said. "We won't stop until we know." They passed the morning tending to basic chores, rotating from the cows to the chickens, then back to Lily and Chance every hour. The barn never felt cold, despite the blizzard's reach. Lily's eyes tracked Helen's every movement, and Chance ventured small forays around the stall, stumbling on lumps of straw. Whenever he lost his balance, Lily nudged him upright. That simple gesture of care tugged at Helen's heart, echoing her own protectiveness for them both. By midday, Martin managed to clear a short path to the main road with the tractor, but the drifts beyond were too formidable to break through. Exhausted, he returned to the house, shaking off clumps of snow. Helen heated a pot of soup, and they ate in focused silence, each aware that the phone had yet to ring. Later in the afternoon, Helen tried the line again. This time, a burst of static yielded to a faint ringing. Her pulse quickened. She caught Martin's eye. On the fifth ring, someone answered, their voice muffled. It was the non-profit's main office. Helen struggled to keep her tone steady as she gave her name. To her astonishment, the woman on the other end recognized it immediately. "We've been trying to call you," the representative said. "We have news regarding your grant application." Helen's mind raced. She forced herself to stay calm, gripping the receiver tight enough to whiten her knuckles. Martin loomed at her shoulder, breath held. After a brief pause, the woman spoke again. "We're pleased to inform you that your application has been approved in full." Relief hit Helen so powerfully that she nearly dropped the phone. She turned to Martin, eyes shining. He let out a long breath, shoulders sagging as though a massive weight had lifted. Though the storm raged outside, in that moment, the house felt luminous. Helen held the phone to her ear, listening as the representative explained the next steps. Formal paperwork, an introductory phone meeting, and a timeline for funds to arrive. They would receive enough to cover Lily's vet bills, plus a supplement for feed, with conditions that they continue to provide updates on Lily's and Chance's well-being. "We believe in your commitment," the woman said. "We're glad to help." When Helen hung up, she stared at Martin in wonder. He managed a small, disbelieving laugh. "You did it," he said, his voice rough with emotion. She shook her head, tears threatening. "No," she corrected gently. "We did it. Lily and Chance deserve this." For a long moment, they simply stood there, hearts thundering as the reality sank in. They would have the resources to see Lily and Chance through the winter, and maybe even secure the farm's future. Martin rubbed a hand over his face, as though banishing lingering doubts. Then, with renewed vigor, they donned their coats, determined to share this moment with the ones who mattered most. The wind still bit at their cheeks as they trudged to the barn, but this time each snowflake felt celebratory. Inside, Lily perked her ears as if sensing the change. Chance, half asleep, blinked awake in surprise. Helen moved to the stall, kneeling by the wooden slats. "We got it," she murmured softly, reaching out to stroke Lily's muzzle. The mare leaned into her touch, calm and content. Martin rested a hand on the stall door, meeting Helen's gaze with a quiet smile. "They'll be all right," he said, and for the first time in many months, his certainty rang clear. Chance wobbled toward them, pressing his little nose to Martin's hand as if in thanks. In the days that followed, the blizzard gradually subsided. Sheets of snow slipped from rooftops, revealing patches of the farm beneath. Now that the grant was secured, a new optimism colored every chore. Dr. Reeves arrived for a checkup, pleasantly surprised by Lily's recovery and the warm news of the grant. "Well earned, if you ask me," the vet said while listening to Lily's heartbeat. "You saved her life. She saved her foal. Now they might save this place in return." Martin stood by, nodding in agreement. The orchard, battered as it was, glimmered under the thinning snow, and Helen felt an echo of possibility stirring for the next season's planting. Word spread quickly among the neighbors. The feed supplier, who had once hesitated to extend credit, congratulated Helen on the phone and offered a small discount for their next purchase. A local reporter even inquired if they could feature Lily and Chance in a human interest column. Martin balked at first, not wanting to be singled out, but Helen convinced him that the story might inspire others who felt overwhelmed by life's hardships. Quietly, Martin admitted that Lily's transformation had moved him in ways he never expected. "I never thought I'd see her stand again," he confided, glancing at Chance. "And look at them now." True to the spirit of second chances, the farm settled into a peaceful rhythm. Lily continued her gradual weight gain, thanks to the specialized feed and careful monitoring from Helen and Dr. Reeves. Chance, bold and curious, began testing short forays into a nearby paddock once the snowdrifts melted enough for safe footing. Martin often stood at the fence, watching the foal gallop clumsily, lips twitching with the hint of a grin. Sometimes he would mutter, "Imagine if we'd lost them," as though grappling with the memory of how close they came to giving up. Helen would slip her arm through his and murmur, "But we didn't," a gentle reminder of the miracle they had nurtured. By the time the last vestiges of winter's snows receded, Lily was almost unrecognizable from that frail mare Martin had first cast out. Though her ribs still showed faintly, her posture brimmed with renewed vitality. Chance had grown taller, bounding across the paddock in short bursts of speed that left him panting in exhilaration. Neighbors who visited often paused in wonder, marveling that this was the same foal whose birth had nearly claimed his mother. "It's unbelievable," one farmer remarked, doffing his cap. "Never seen a foal so lively after such a rough start," Martin replied, with a reserved nod, but Helen beamed in quiet pride. Standing on the barn's threshold one late afternoon, Helen gazed at Lily and Chance with tears in her eyes. A gentle breeze ruffled the foal's soft mane. She thought of those early mornings spent trembling with fear, the frantic calls to Dr. Reeves, and the bittersweet moment Martin had almost walked away entirely. Now Lily nickered at her, a sound that felt like gratitude. Chance trotted in a circle, flicking his tail as he discovered something new, a patch of fresh clover, the season's first sign of renewal. The entire farm seemed to exhale in harmony, comforted by the knowledge that compassion, once unleashed, had the power to rewrite destiny. In that hush of golden light, Helen turned to Martin. He caught her eye and shrugged, his voice raw with awe. "I never knew a horse could change us like this," he admitted quietly, scanning the farm they both loved. "But that mare and her foal, they proved me wrong." Helen rested a hand on his shoulder. "They reminded us we're not alone," she said, letting her gaze wander to Lily and Chance. "And that hope can surprise us in the darkest moments." Together, they watched Lily nuzzle Chance, mother and child inseparable beneath the wide, open sky. It was the ending Helen never dared imagine. The farm saved by a foal nobody believed would survive, and a mare who refused to give up. If ever there was a shock born from heartbreak, this was it. A new life forging a bond that no storm, no hardship could break.